1 Samuel 2:12. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Bela. They knew not the Lord. You know, the worst thing we can have in the church is those serving who do not follow the Lord. It isn't good leadership. If leadership isn't following the Lord, then leadership is not good at all. Leadership is bad if it's not justified through the Lord. Exodus 14:26 through 31. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, and let the water flow back over the Egyptians, their chariots and their cavalry." So the Lord told Moses what to do, and Moses simply just stretched out his hand. Moses simply showed faith in what the Lord was going to do. And Moses didn't say, "Lord, why don't you just do it, and then I'll stretch out my hand." Moses didn't say, "Well, Lord, I don't know if you can do that." Moses simply stretched out his hand and showed faith in what the Lord said. Sometimes that's all the Lord wants for us. He doesn't want us to ask questions. He wants us to simply show faith. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the water returned in its accustomed place, but the Egyptians were flat as it advanced, and the Lord swept them out into the sea. So the Lord destroyed the Egyptians. The Lord allowed Israel to cross, and the Egyptians to drown. You know, the Egyptians were a problem for Israel. A problem the Lord just took care of. You know, sometimes we may have problems chasing after us. Israel had to put up with Egypt for a very long time. But that time, the Lord took care of it. Eventually, come time, the Lord will take care of our problems. There'll be a day where we don't got to face problems anymore. Verse 28. The water flowed back and covered all Pharaoh's army, the chariots and cavalry, which had pressed the pursuit into the sea. Not one man left alive. Meanwhile, the Egyptians had passed along dry ground through the sea, with water making a wall for them to the right and to the left. You know, part of the reason why Egypt was destroyed was so Egypt would never pursue after Israel again. By the time they would regroup, Israel would have conquered the Promised Land. Israel would be mightier than Egypt ever would have been again. It was God's plan to remove Egypt from being that problem, and He did that. Egypt couldn't pursue after Israel again. Not only was it unreachable by crossing the sea into a land where they knew not know where they go, but they didn't have the means to do it. They no longer had the finances to do it because the plagues wiped out them where they'd have to rebuild. God justifies Israel. God punishes those. He punished Egypt in this one instance for all subjection they've given to Israel. God will avenge His people. But as His people, we should pray that those wronging us come to faith so they avoid God's wrath, because one day we deserve it too. The only thing that separates us from them is we got grace of God because we've come to Christ. So rather than pray for spite against our enemies, we should pray that they turn to the Lord before their destruction does come. Verse 30. That day the Lord saved Israel from the power of Egypt, and the Israelites saw the Egyptians lying on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had put forth against Egypt, all the people feared the Lord, and they put their faith in Him and in Moses, His servant. So part of the reason why this was done was so Israel could turn to the Lord. Israel could have faith united in their Lord. Their faith is what united them in the Lord. As the church, the thing that should unite us is our faith in our Lord, Jesus. It isn't where we go, or where we're located, or what language we speak, but it's the one we serve, and our faith in Him. Israel was a unit now. And they were going to follow the Lord and realized Moses was His servant. If we're not following the Lord as a church, we're not united together. If we're following after our traditions or doctrines or all this other stuff, that ain't necessarily bad. But if we're not following Him, then we're not united. Because our traditions and our doctrines necessarily ain't united. Our families, our languages aren't always united. But we'll be united in Him because He's much bigger than all that. And that's where faith will come.